We'll discuss how zero knowledge proofs and KYC, AML, which stands for Know Your Customer, anti-money laundering, how these regulations can work together with this technology. I am Liz Steininger from Least Authority, and our panelists today are Jack Gavigan, Head of Product and Regulatory Relations at Electric Coin Company, Nasim Jenkouk, lawyer at Annerton, Raymond, software engineer at Government Technology Agency. And yeah, before we get into the discussion, I would like to first ask each of our panelists to shortly say, why do you think this discussion is important? So I will pass it to you three if someone wants to jump in.
I'll start off. I think that this discussion is important because zero knowledge proofs are a massively powerful technology. They hold out a huge amount of potential for preserving privacy, but also for making technology that involves proving things, presenting evidence of things far more efficient than it is today. In the case of Zcash, which I'm part of the team of, we've leveraged them to provide privacy for a blockchain, which we then use to issue a cryptocurrency that has presented the benefit of users or to users of having their financial information protected, but it then also presents a challenge or a concern for regulators around the ability of users of this technology to be compliant with the relevant regulations. So mutual understanding between the technology space and the regulation space is massively important. That's why discussions like this are useful. They help educate, and that's why I think this is an important discussion to have.
Yeah, I guess I'll go next. I think the discussion is very interesting because zero knowledge proof has been floating around for a while now, and very few people actually understand what the technology is about, and it's just kind of like a magic black box just happening, and very often it gets confused with blockchains and the likes of it. And I think it's important that we just clear out some of the misrepresentations of this technology. And the very fact that it's nascent and moving very fast can scare people off. And the last people that we want to scare them off is actually regulators and policymakers. And I think this is a very great platform for all of us to talk about the technology, from perspectives of like the regulators, the legal side of things, and also from the technology aspects of things. And yeah, the panelists is actually coming from a very diverse background, and that's a very great way to start this discussion. Yeah.
From my perspective, and I totally agree with the other panelists, it's really important to understand the technology we are talking about, and to discuss this from various angles, because there are legal requirements to comply, and also in order to review or to assess whether these legal requirements are met, it's fundamental to understand the technical setup, which is the grounds of our assessments. And in a time where data privacy is really important, and also from a legal perspective is really important, it's really good to understand what are the technical opportunities we have, and how can these technical opportunities be used to comply with the legal requirements.
Great, thanks. So I guess we should also talk about the different types of zero knowledge proofs and the different types of regulations and also use cases for zero knowledge proofs and how these pieces can fit together to have the technology remain compliant as we and the implementations remain compliant. So do any of you have some examples of or examples of use cases that you find is helpful for people to better understand, or an explanation of the technology that maybe helps helps some of the challenges that are faced when people misunderstand how how zero knowledge proofs can work with compliance to regulations.
I think a good example for explaining what zero knowledge proofs are to people is the example of proving one's age. So let's say you're going to a bar and you want to order a drink. In most countries, there are minimum age limits for when you're allowed to purchase alcohol. Here in the UK, it's 18 years old. And classic way or classic situation is you're trying to get into a nightclub and you look young, so the guy on the door says, well, do you have any ID? And he doesn't want to know your identity. He wants to know how old you are. He wants you to be able to demonstrate that you're over 18 years old. And in order to do so, the classic way is to present or show them a piece of government ID. Which has typically will have your name. Sometimes it'll have your address if it's, for example, a driving license, and it'll have your date of birth. And they look at the date of birth, and that's all they're really interested in. They're not really interested in the rest. And they hand it back to you, they either let you in or they send you on your way. But that's a classic example of where a bunch of information is disclosed in that interaction, your name and your address, for example, that isn't necessary for the interaction. All that they're really worried about is, are you over the age of 18? It's that single atomic or binary piece of information. And that is a situation where a zero knowledge proof could help, where if you're able to present a zero knowledge proof that said, this person is over 18, you don't need to know their date of birth, you don't need to know where they live, you don't need to know their name, they're over 18, and that then fulfills the regulatory requirement, if you will, that only those over that age limit can get into that establishment and order alcohol. So that's the sort of example that I use. In practice, there's a far wider range of applications. Really, this is a technology that can be applied to many different use cases.
Yeah. So maybe I'll build onto Jack's analogy, because that's also my favorite analogy as well, because it's so easy to explain it. In fact, I drew something. So all zero knowledge proof actually looks like that, right? Because you have a circuit, right? And what happens is that when we talk about zero knowledge, right, it's not just about everything being hidden away from us. There's often what you call this zero knowledge circuit that does the black box magic thing. We don't have to understand this in the context of this discussion. But what you have to understand is actually that there's an element of the public signal and the private signal. So in the case of this ID, right, when I want to enter the bar, right, this is what happened. I want to know that the knowledge, the birth age, right, is actually attested by the government. So it's the equivalent of a government issued ID. And this should be public. It should be seen that, okay, the source of this commitment is coming from the government. And then you have the private signal. The private signal is perhaps like, oh, I was born in 1990s. And this is hidden away from the subject, or rather the receiver of the proof, right? So the prover knows this, but the person receiving the proof does not know this. And at the end of the day, it goes into this circuit where we can trust the circuit, and then there's the output. So in this case, it looks like that. You have public signal, which is your government commitment of some sort, a private signal that has your birth age, right, and perhaps even today's date, right, so that it does a comparison between my birth date, today's date, and then calculate if I'm more than 21 today, and then does an output that says that true or false. So in the case of this bar, bouncer at the bar, he does not know my birth age at all. I could be 70 or a 200-year-old monster, and he wouldn't have more information from this mechanism itself. So at the gist of it, all zero knowledge proof looks like that. There's always a public signal, then there's also private information. And at the end of it, we are always trying to solve or satisfy what you call a business constraint. So zero knowledge proof, there's no one size fit all application. In fact, it is always driven by business constraint. So building on that point, then you can see, especially in the blockchain space, there's actually a lot of applications of zero knowledge proof, right? One of it is, privacy coin, where I can say that, I sent something from an address. I don't tell you the amount. I don't tell you the address, the recipient address, but I can prove to you that certain business constraints held, that I didn't create more coin on the fly, that the balance didn't go into the negative zones, right? Then from this case, then I can build a privacy preserving, transaction in that aspect. And then you also have like mixes, right? Where I can actually mix up different coins from different sources and then just dispatch it. There are also cases of where you have distributions of goods, right? Signaling to show that certain businesses constraints are held. So these are very wide applications of that. And in a lot of cases, if you have a business constraints that require you to prove something that you don't want to see what is, right? Very likely you can have zero knowledge proof applied to that. Yeah.
Thanks. And Nasim, from the legal perspective, how do you see zero knowledge proofs and the regulations?
Sure. Like from my perspective, we need to distinguish between different legal requirements that needs to be fulfilled. One, of course, is privacy, data privacy, GDPR in the European context. And from a data privacy point of view, a lot of the setups for the zero knowledge proof would be really appreciated, because they fulfill one aspect which is really crucial for data privacy, the privacy, the mitigation of data you are sharing with other companies as you are processing. So from this perspective, this would be privacy by design, would be really appreciated from a GDPR perspective. But already from a data privacy perspective, there are a number of legal requirements which would need to be met, which in some contexts are not met, or which should be reviewed in more detail. For example, is the provider of this specific service, how do they comply with further requirements? For example, with deletion requirements under, for example, GDPR, that you need to delete data after a certain period of time, which is really a huge discussion with regard to blockchains, etc. And the other context, and I don't want to focus on the privacy requirements, because I think this is not the focus of our discussion right now, but the other focus is from a regulatory point of view, what do regulated companies need to comply with? And this is really crucial from an KYC AML perspective. And this is like as if the legislator has two hearts in his chest. One is like data privacy, and the other one is I need to know everything, and I really need to know what you're doing and every information you have from your customers. And we have auditors and regulators who can audit you. And these are the two extremes that need to meet. And from a legal point of view, the AML requirements, which need to be fulfilled by banks and payment service providers, and there are really a number of PSPs out there that and entities that need to fulfill this nowadays. They need to comply with AML requirement. And what does this mean? It means that you need to check for every of your customers, depending on the transactional amount of the in the specific case, who this person is. So there is, under European law, you need to, for example, take the name of this customer, have a copy of the identification card. You need to see who the beneficial owners of the transaction are, and there are a really long list of requirements you need to take, and you can take it yourself as the entity that is regulated, or you can use service providers. But using service providers wouldn't be it's not that you use a service provider and you don't need the information. The service provider need to provide you with this information. So it's like that you're just using another company for doing the same thing. So there are a number of requirements you need to fulfill, and the intention is full transparency. It's and this is crucial to understand, that these requirements, these regulatory requirements, are justification under data privacy law. That means that whenever you're doing this as a regulated company, you have a legal justification to do so and a legal obligation to do so. And it really is crucial for the setup of the zero knowledge proof, whether the setup can be done in a way that regulated entities can comply with these requirements. And from a legal perspective, I'm happy to learn more from the technical point of view, because it's really interesting from my perspective.
I think there's different. There's different. So in the same way that zero knowledge proofs can be used for a very wide range of use cases, there are different ways in which they interact with a regulated entity and an entity that is obliged to fulfill certain obligations. The example of providing privacy when funds are being transferred on a public blockchain, that's often misunderstood as meaning that the information is hidden from everybody, whereas in fact, if funds are being sent from a customer to a regulated institution, or from a regulated institution to a customer, then both ends of the interaction know who else is involved. In the same way that when I go into a bank and deposit cash, or when I withdraw cash from an ATM, the bank implicitly knows who I am, because they have to know whose account the cash goes into. At the same time, you don't necessarily want all of your bank records to be published on the internet, for everybody to see. And that's the sort of paradigm that we see with regards to preserving privacy in the context of blockchains. I think in the wider potential applications of zero knowledge proofs, there's some paradigm changes that this technology brings about. I think the first is that in the legal world, proof is typically the result of evidence being presented. You bring a bunch of evidence in order to prove something, and that evidence then becomes a record. And it may be that in the context of doing AML, KYC, you need to present a whole bunch of information about yourself, about your income, about your expenditures, etc. And so that's the zero knowledge proof concept has the potential to remove the need for presenting that evidence, and therefore to store it. And then obviously if you store that information, there's a risk of it being leaked and the individual's privacy being breached. So that's the first change. The second change in the context of regulation specifically is what you alluded to, the obligation to preserve records, the obligation to store this information. And that's where I think the objective of regulation becomes quite important. In the context of prevention of money laundering, for example, there may be a requirement that you do not provide services to a sanctioned individual. So that's a very simple binary requirement. But there may also be a separate requirement that when you do provide services to any individual, you keep records of all the transactions that you carry out. So that then requires that you store information and make it available to regulators, law enforcement, investigators as required. So I think that zero knowledge proofs have some very useful applications in the context of certain regulatory requirements, but other requirements may mean that they cannot be fulfilled using zero knowledge proofs, because whilst a bank might be comfortable with the idea that, right, I can accept a zero knowledge proof, from a qualified or a trustworthy third party that this person is not a sanctioned, not on the list of sanctioned individuals from these various jurisdictions, they may still have a requirement to record my name, my address, and all the details of my transactions. So the potential for zero knowledge proofs to change how regulation is conducted is certainly there, but in some cases it will need some review of how we do things currently, both in the context of being used to evidence or information being gathered in order to prove something and then stored in order to be able to prove it after the fact, and also this context of being able to prove something without the need to present the evidence to back it up.
So I think building on that, it's interesting that zero knowledge proof is unlike your usual evidence that you see in court. Very often when you use a zero knowledge proof, you are not presenting the piece of information itself, and that actually requires the legal framework and the legal framework of the country to actually recognize these things as, oh, these are valid evidences. While it's just mathematical points in different spaces, it is provable that unless a certain constraints were held, or unless like a certain freak accidents will happen, that this evidence is indeed valid in the court setting, right? Because very often in today's world, we are talking about, okay, if you want to prove to me certain thing did happen, you have to show me that thing itself. So it's something that it's quite new to this space right now. And I think as Jack was talking about the different use cases, I think I can pretty much sum up 3 of the applications of zero knowledge proof right now. Just now we talked about the proof of knowledge, where I can show you that I can prove to you that I know something, but not telling you what it is. The other one is also membership proof. So membership proof tells you that I am in a subset or not in the subset of some certain something. And in Jack's example, he talked about AML having a list of sanctioned countries or individuals. And this is also important because you can then build a application around this to say that I prove to you that I am not one of the blacklisted individuals, therefore you should allow me on the wire. But I'm not telling you which of them I am. Or, I can prove to you that I'm in the whitelist of a certain individual that has certain privilege. Let's say I'm an accredited investor in the US, right? But I'm not telling you which one of it I am, right? And then I can still be allowed to access certain financial services, right? So that's membership proof. And then you also have range proof. So range proof are like, okay, in the case of the age, that is actually range proof, right? I prove to you that I'm above a certain number is above a certain number, or below a certain number, or in between certain numbers. Those are also quite applicable if, let's say, you're registering for businesses. And then they say, okay, you need a paid up capital of $1 million so that I could trust you and I sue you if something goes wrong. I don't have to show you my full balance in my bank account, but yet I can prove to you that I have the capital to have the capital guarantee to do business with you. So these are a few applications of what you call gadgets in the zero knowledge proof world and the business use case. Yeah.
And now me again from a legal perspective. Just to give you an idea, and I really don't want to bore you because I don't think it's the most interesting questions from your perspective, but from a legal perspective, maybe different. Like from a legal perspective, the situation is like this: you have regulated entities, for example, a bank, and in order to be able to act as a bank in Europe, you would need an authorization to do so. And you need to prove that you as a bank have the organizational capacities to comply with legal requirements, and you also are, let's say, you are willing to comply with all legal requirements and also with requirements to store data and to provide such proof to the auditors or to the let's say the entity, the governmental entity being authorized to review you. So, and one of these requirements is, for example, AML requirements, which is like one of our main topics. And in order to keep your authorization to act as a bank, you need to comply with these requirements. Otherwise, for example, in Germany, the BaFin could come and say, you are not complying with legal requirements and this is against law and you are not allowed to work as a bank anymore. This is a really harsh thing to happen for example, a regulated entity. And one of these requirements, as said, is AML, meaning you can do it yourself. You need to take all this information given by law, or you can use a third party. And when using a third party, it's not like that you can just use the third party and the third party tells you, oh, everything is okay and you can trust that. You need to, the third party is seen as your arm. It's one part of your body. Let's make it in this picture. It's one part of your body and you must be in control of your arm. And to prove that you are in control, you need to have legal, like contractual setup that allows you to, for example, audit this company, that allows you to get all information you need to provide to the auditors yourself. And there are further requirements. I don't want to go into detail here. And it wouldn't be from a setup right now, how the legal setup is now, it wouldn't be sufficient just to have like a green light saying, oh, every requirement is met, trust me. It wouldn't be sufficient. You would need, as a bank or a payment service provider, or any other regulated company, you would need to have full view on everything which is happening in this third-party service provider sphere. And from my perspective, from a data privacy perspective and from a usability perspective, I think there may be options to change that, but not under the legal setup which is currently in place. And also, I'm just from observing how the discussions are going in this part, it's not that the requirements are getting less. From my perspective, the legislators are putting much more pressure on the regulated entities and want to have more proofs that they are complying with legal requirements, because there is this really fear that there could be transactions which would be used for terrorists, or that money laundering could take place, or that people could fraudulently use customers' money, just to make it easy. And so it's not that the requirements are getting less; they're getting more, and it's and there might be a different, like, that the technology is trying to get more into the point of data privacy, and the regulation is more and more getting in a way that they want the regulated entities to be compliant and to make sure that they have all the data and they have actually the proof themselves, so that they could review themselves whether the requirements are met or not. And this is something which, from my perspective, is really interesting to see.
Yes, I think this harks back to what I was saying about the legal paradigm and also the regulatory paradigm, where I think that this is a new technology. It has some potential uses, but the people who would need to trust that the technology is proving the right things, they need to get comfortable with the technology. I think the fact that regulation is the regulatory burden on regulated entities is growing, and similarly the effort that is required by regulators to verify all this information is similarly increasing. I think that provides a strong motivation to seek to find ways to reduce the effort that's required both in terms of if I've been KYC'd by one bank currently, if I open an account with a different bank, they also have to KYC me, and it would remove a lot of duplication of effort if that KYC qualification were portable. If I could present a zero knowledge proof that said I've been KYC'd by another bank, and that they could then accept that. That's not currently possible under the current regulations, but that is the sort of paradigm shift that I think will need to happen in order for zero knowledge proofs to realize their potential, to make to reduce the regulatory burden, and to make the whole process more efficient. Will it happen overnight? Absolutely not. It takes time for the specific use cases to emerge, and for regulators shouldn't move too quickly, because there are risks associated with that too. So they need to gain comfort. They need to gain an understanding of this technology. But I'm confident that it will come in time. But I think that time frame is probably measured in years rather than months or weeks.
So should we talk about certain use cases that maybe we could get into more detail about, that are realistic right now, perhaps, and how that might compare to what's possible in the future?
Yeah. So I'll start off with the obvious one, which is the use of zero knowledge proofs to provide privacy on on a blockchain for cryptocurrency. That's what we've done with Zcash, and what that means is that with a first generation cryptocurrency such as Bitcoin, when you write a transaction to the blockchain, in order for it to be accepted as valid, you need to demonstrate certain things. You need to demonstrate that the number of coins going into the transaction is the same as the number of coins going out. So therefore, you prove that you're not creating coins out of thin air. You need to be able to prove that the person creating the transaction has the authority to spend those coins, and you need to prove that those coins have not previously been spent. That the double spending problem was a key issue that Bitcoin successfully resolved. Now, with the sort of technology that we've used behind Zcash, you're able to prove those things without revealing the amount that's being transferred, or the source, or indeed the destination addresses. Now that inherently provides privacy, because I can then no longer scan a blockchain and use analytics or data mining software to identify how many funds a particular address holds, and then if I can link that address to a person, that then effectively breaches their privacy. But it also on the regulatory and law enforcement investigation side, they've grown used to being able to trace transactions through a blockchain and to be able to say, right, so this transaction received funds from that address, and tracing it back. And that's been quite useful in terms of investigating crimes, thefts, extortion, fraud, etc. So that's one of the part of the tension between personal privacy and the ability of law enforcement to investigate crime. And there are obviously laws and rules in place that limit the extent to which law enforcement is able to normally access individuals' personal data. But in this case, it's not just available to law enforcement; it's available to the entire world to see. So that's one of the issues that has arisen. I think another issue that has arisen is the fact that many people believe that the privacy that is provided by such a use case is absolute. That if you're a customer of an exchange, and you use this sort of technology to deposit funds with that exchange, that the exchange can't identify you. And that, of course, is not the case. But it's a very common misconception, and it's one of the it's the sort of misconception that I spend a lot of time combating and seeking to correct. But I think, at the moment, that's obviously, that's the big use case that we have implemented. But I'm sure that Raymond will be able to give a few more examples.
Right, I'll just talk about a few of my favorites that I'm seeing out there right now. I'm more familiar with the Ethereum space, unfortunately. And, while I did study like Zcash implementation, like I say, it's very similar to a lot of applications are quite similar. So the concepts actually, flow from one blockchain to another. So one of my favorite out there right now is this protocol called Semaphore. It's actually not a coin or anything, but basically it's a signaling device that allows you to say that given a set of people, let's say 5 people, right? I can actually generate a proof that one of them or all of them can actually send a signal somewhere, not necessarily a blockchain, right? And that signal, you can see that there's a proof that that signal is generated by one of the 5, but you don't know how many, which one of them is that. So how is this useful in the real world? This can actually be used in the case of, let's say, in a board members meeting where a certain vote or a board action is to be taken. They will like to issue a statement from the board, but not showing who exactly the board member is, right? Such use cases can be used, right? It can also be used for such a thing like voting, right? If I were to replace the entire, say, U.S. election with this mechanism, I can then say that as a US citizen, I can prove that I am a member of this identity group called US citizen, right? And I vote for a certain individual. And yet, there is evidence, there is a way to prove that I am a member of this group, but yet you can't trace back to who actually sent that signal. So now, like what Jack mentioned, this concept of absolute privacy. If I use, zero knowledge proof, I can't be identified. Like what you say, it's not quite true, right? Because at the end of the day, it depends on who you present the evidence to as well. Because if, let's say, I conducted a private transaction of certain sort, right, and then I go around flaunting to my friend that this is me doing this transaction, and this is the proof that it is me doing this transaction, and then he posted on LinkedIn or Twitter, and pretty much the entire world knows about it, right? And very similarly, you can think of like zero knowledge proof as a mechanism to say that I have a document, I have a secret document, just because I use a zero knowledge proof sort of mechanism to protect this or transfer it. Maybe someone with the original document can also then prove that it is the document being transacted out. It's the same problem as like if I have a secret document, I take my camera phone, take a snapshot, and I have that as well. So we have to be aware that zero knowledge proof is pretty much a protocol. It's not the solution, it's not the application, right? And we should be more concerned about what are some of the application. And from Semaphore, the signaling device that I was talking about, then there are people who then take it and build into like different kind of like secret voting or even anti-collusion mechanisms, right? So these are all very interesting application of zero knowledge proof that you are already seeing today. It's not even like we are looking through a looking glass and say that this is a technology of tomorrow. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's similar to back in the 60s and 70s, people at various research institutions were working on these marvelous new computing technologies, and they were inventing the graphical user interface, and they were inventing the computer mouse. But it took, there were technology proofs of concept, and it took a long time for them to become widely adopted and for us to find the right use cases. I think that's the same sort of situation that we're in with zero knowledge proofs. There are certain contexts in which they are useful today, but they also rely, for wider use cases, they rely on certain other there are dependencies. So, for example, with the example of being able to prove your age when you're going into a nightclub, that presupposes that there is a government or other type of ID that is issued, and that has the technical capability to be able to demonstrate to create that proof. So there's a lot of it's not a silver bullet. It's not something that can solve these problems overnight. But I think it is something that, as our world becomes more digitized, we can potentially start to see that some of those dependencies and some of those prerequisites are being fulfilled, and that will start to increase the potential for this technology to be used.
Yeah, maybe I'll add on to that, because he reminds me of the role of government is actually quite important in this space, especially if you're going to talk about citizens' identity, because we are not just going to jump into a whole new world of decentralized identity altogether, where everyone start from scratch. I have no identity at all, but very often we are living in a real world with real world identity, right? And that means that I need my government on board before I can actually do a lot of things, like even the simplest card to say that I'm above 18, it requires the government to be on board, right? So it takes a while for that to happen. But I think here's where I throw in a plug about one of the projects that I worked on, right? It's called OpenSits. It's actually using, at the end of it, it's already zero knowledge proof 3 years ago. Education institutes in Singapore are issuing degree transcripts, degree programs, to say that my student, a certain student, right, had certain grades for certain things, and that student can actually generate a proof from there to say that don't reveal all my grades. I can just show you that I'm really good at data structure and algorithm. I got an A+ for that, without telling you even my master's is actually in art, and then I failed all my computer sciences course, that sort of things, right? It's already being done, and some governments are already a little bit more forward looking in trying these things out. And I'll say that it's more of this low stake, low stake projects that can really start the ball rolling, because you're not talking about a nationwide national digital identity infrastructure that if it fails, a lot of bad things could happen. But you try with something that is not so serious. If it fails, bad things happen, but not catastrophic, right? Yeah. So I think perhaps we could jump into some of the questions from the audience. A lot of them are very excited already.
Yeah, that's a great thing to transition here. One thing that I think it also might be worthwhile to kind of to bridge with one of these questions. We've gotten some questions about the nature of the probabilistic proof, and how that technically is interpreted from a legal perspective. And I'd also be curious to tack on to that about view keys and viewing keys, and what kind of acceptance there is of these kinds of variations of sharing the data. So yeah, anyone want to jump in?
Excuse me, I didn't get the first question.
Oh, so I think the probabilistic aspect of zero knowledge proofs, and how that's I guess received, or could be received from the legal perspective.
So I think what that's referring to is whilst we use the term zero knowledge proof, in some of the implementations, it's more technically characterized as an argument of knowledge, and what it is it presents it demonstrates that the likelihood of a statement being false is vanishingly small. It's like 1 in a billion, or 1 in 100 billion, or something like that, and therefore, so some people say that as a result, the word proof is not accurate, and it's better to use something like an argument of knowledge. I think that, you know, there are similar concepts in the legal system already. Things like DNA matching, where, you know, it's not a guaranteed match, but there's you know, the likelihood of it being incorrect is 1 in a billion. So I think that the legal system is comfortable with that idea that it's a probabilistic argument, saying that the probability of this not being true is tiny, so small as to not really be real, and therefore the likelihood of it being true is good enough for government work, as some people use the phrase in the United States.
I think from my perspective, it really depends on the context. From a general idea, I totally agree. It's not that this idea is not known in as a legal proof, but it really depends on the context. Is it something that the law had set the grounds what you need to provide as a proof? Then I think there is no way to argue around that. So it's really totally clear. The law says you need X, Y, Z, and in case you don't have it, this wouldn't be sufficient. But there are compliance requirements or other requirements where you can provide a proof, and it's like more a risk assessment where you can see, oh, is the risk high or is it not so high? And for this context, this could work.
Yeah, maybe I'll weigh in on the probability part of it. Here's something interesting. Like, do you know that all private keys of, you know, Bitcoin or Ethereum are just out there? Like all of them, like it's enumerable, right? From 0000 to FFFFF, right? It's all there, you know. So if you like to, you know, just take a stab, you know, roll a random number every day, or roll hundreds of random number every day, and see if you do land on like Satoshi's wallet, and you have access to a lot of Bitcoins, and that's probability too. And when we are talking about probability, it scares people when they say that, you know, there is a chance that certain bad things could happen without realization of like how big that chance is, right? And when we look at this, we want to assess it from the point of how likelihood that could happen, right? Let's say if the zero knowledge proof circuit has been set up properly, that a certain privilege key has been revoked, or no one has the knowledge because it's generated through something like a multi-party computations, then you can say that it's actually quite unlikely that anyone can generate a fake proof, given that they don't have the evidence for it. Then you're pretty much looking at very, very, very small probabilistic of that argument of knowledge failing. Then the other part of it is that then you have malicious intent, and also things that are happening outside of the space, right? Take for instance, if I were to lose my private key that could be used to generate, let's say, a membership proof, right, to someone else, right? That person, someone who is, you know, under 18 can actually masquerade as Raymond and generates a proof that it is above 21 and gets into the nightclub. What then you should be worried about is not the failure of the technology itself, but what can you use, you know, beyond just the technology to actually have more certainty that, you know, a certain constraint did help. So in this example, perhaps you can say that, other than just generating the proof to the nightclub, I can have a certain photograph, right? And then the photograph hashes something, and then the hash is one of the public input to the signal, right? And that could happen, right? So a lot of the time we are very focused on the very, very little probabilistic of something happening, right? And that's just the probability part. And the other one is about objective truth, right? When we look at, you know, evidence, you know, presented in court right now, let's say we are looking at a case of someone murdering someone, and there's a video footage of that happening, and that person has his fingerprint on the murder weapon. Can you then say for sure that that person murdered the victim? right? A lot of people think that that is, that is a very clear evidence of, the murderer being the murderer, right? But I would argue that, perhaps the video could be doctored. Perhaps in an alternate universe, alien, morphed into that murderer and somehow got a fingerprint on the murder weapon. All of this are likely going to happen, right? Although it's not probabilistic, it's unlikely, right? And any statisticians can tell you the same. When you assess evidence from the math point of view, there's never a case where you can say, I am absolute certain that I have the objective truth and this is the real truth of the world. It just doesn't happen. Yeah. And zero knowledge proof just falls into one of this evidence, and it's best used when you can corroborate with other evidence. Yeah.
And then to address the question about viewing keys, so in and this is relevant to the very specific use case that of providing privacy on a blockchain. If you use something like Zcash to send or receive shielded transactions, obviously those transactions cannot be viewed by the general public on the blockchain. So let's say I'm an exchange or a financial institution, and I operate using a shielded address, and I receive deposits from customers. I allow withdrawals, and implicitly, if a customer has made a deposit with me, I should, per prudential regulations, hold the same number of coins that customers have deposited with me. So an auditor may want to verify that fact, and in the traditional world, what you would do is you would simply show them a record of all the transactions in and out. But what you can do using a viewing key is you can say, well, here is this is the shielded address in which I hold all of these coins. You can't view it publicly on the blockchain, but here's a viewing key, and you can see all the transactions going in and out, and you can calculate for yourself what the balance of that address, that payment address is, and whether it matches what the records of the customer deposits. And the interesting thing about this is you're not just providing your records to the auditor, you're providing them with the ability to verify the transactions and the balance of that address against the actual blockchain. So it's a stronger set of evidence, if you want, than you simply just providing them with access to your books, which could be doctored or could be misrepresented. And it also has uses in the regulatory AML world, where if you, for example, are an exchange and you want to have some visibility of what your customer is doing, you can ask them to share a viewing key for their address with you so that you can check. But again, the regulations around this space are still evolving. This is a capability, a piece of functionality that is adjacent to the core technology of zero knowledge proofs, useful for some things, not necessarily, again, as we've said before, not necessarily a silver bullet solving all of these regulatory challenges.
From my perspective, it's really interesting to see which different setups we are discussing now, and every setup would have so different legal impacts, and this is so crucial to understand that. For example, already from a data privacy point of view, if you look at a GDPR, so there are, depending on the setup we have, a number of requirements would need to be fulfilled. For example, the question, is the key to the data already itself a personal data? So this is a really interesting question. And depending on the technology, as said in the beginning, so there are legal requirements with regard to confidentiality. Is the information public? Is it not public? And there are different ways to handle that in the different setups. Or is there someone like a central controlling entity about the data, or is it something that is just like decentralized? This would be already from a data privacy point of view, would be I don't want to use the word problem because it would be something to look at. And this is already from a data privacy point of view. And then we can, and this is irrelevant from the use for which purpose, like not irrelevant, but this is already the grounds. Is the technical setup in a way that would comply with data privacy requirements? And then in the second step, there is this further regulatory requirements. Is that now we have the technical grounds, and then can the regulated entity use this data for the purposes they are required to use them for? And this is like a two-step review assessment from a from a legal point of view. And I think it's really depends on like potentially tiny differences in the technical setup you have and the purposes you want to use them for.
I think that that's a really great ending point for us. It's a great way to sum it up, that there aren't any maybe easy answers here, that we've got some things that both technically and legally need to be looked at in the details, that the application, the implementation, they matter. And so I really appreciate everybody joining us for this. I would like to thank our speakers for participating in the panel, and I'd also like to thank the other groups who helped Least Authority organize this event, the Electric Coin Company, Singapore University of Social Sciences, and the Blockchain Association of Singapore. And of course, everybody for attending and joining us for this panel. Like I said, there's just, like our panelists said too, there's a lot on this topic. It's a very exciting space, and I think there'll be more discussions to come in the future on this. So thanks again, everybody, and that's it for today.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.
Everyone. And this panel was live streamed to YouTube. You'll be getting an email with that link, and you can continue the conversation there as well.